Space battles are an important aspect of Star Wars. I mean, come on, it's literally in the name. But time and time again, I, as well as many of you, may have noticed that the fleets used in these epic clashes of good and evil are less than ideal. That is, except for one. I'm Zach from the Five Nights Tavern, and today, we're going to take a look at why I think the Rebel Alliance has the best fleet. Let's get started. Now, when I say the best fleet, it's important to establish a point of comparison before deep diving into the Rebel fleet itself. And for that, I'm going to take a quick look at the other three main factions of the original 6 films: the Republic, the Separatists, and the Empire. I would include the First Order and the Resistance in here, but if we're going to be honest with each other, they're really just rehashes of the Empire and the Rebellion, so they'll be left out of this particular discussion. Up first, we've got ourselves the Grand Army of the Republic. And right off the bat, we're going to crash into an issue that plagues into not only the Republic, but the Empire as well, and that is their over-reliance on capital ships above all else. Now, the Republic's main vessel is the Venator-class Star Destroyer, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that this thing was the only ship they ever built. The typical fleet that we'd see in the films in the Clone Wars animated series would be a couple of these ships and not much else. On occasion, we'd spot some smaller acclimators or consular classes, but these are few and far between, leaving the Venator and her fighter complement to handle everything else. Real quick, I'd like to direct your attention towards real-world navies, where we see a diverse lineup of ships, each of which having a specialized role within their fleets. Aircraft carriers are the heart of a modern fleet, able to launch fighters while being weak to direct assault. The carrier relies on her other ships within the fleet to defend and screen against threats from above and below. Cruisers, destroyers, submarines, they all serve unique purposes. I bring this up because the Venator is essentially an aircraft carrier with a few gun straps to her. When it comes to launching fighters, she excels, but when it comes time to slug it out with other battleships and cruisers, well, let's just say that things don't usually go right for the humble Star Destroyer. Thankfully, it's not all doom and gloom for the Republic, as they boast a mighty lineup of starfighter types that are perfectly suited for just about any occasion. For dogfighting, look to the V-19 Torrent or the V-Wing. Need something a little more heavy? Then call upon the formidable ARC-170 Heavy Fighter. Perhaps speed is more your thing. We'll hop into an Eta-2 Interceptor. It's fast enough for the Jedi, it's certainly fast enough for you. Or maybe you prefer to just blow stuff up. Well, my friend, the Y-Wing Bomber has all the ordnance you could ever need to show those clankers who's boss. All joking aside, where the Republic fails in capital ships, it certainly makes up for in spades with starfighters. But wars aren't won with just fighters. Without a solid navy to back them up, you're going to find yourself in a world of trouble. Next up to be put under the microscope is the Separatist Droid Army, and if I'm being completely honest, this faction could have also taken the top spot for the best fleet had it not been for a few key issues that held it back. Unlike the Republic, the Separatist Navy boasted a powerful and varied fleet of warships that specialized in key roles that helped them beat the one-trick pony that is the Republic in many battles during the early years of the Clone Wars. The Lucrehulk battleship was a powerhouse of a vessel, and the largest mainline ship fielded by the Separatists. I'm not going to count the Subjugator-class ships like the Malevolence, as that was more of a one-off ship and not a key component of the droid fleet. The Lucrehulk was armed to the teeth with heavy cannons, while also doubling as a mobile base, with massive supply hangars to house much-needed equipment for invasions. We also see battleships and cruisers like the Providence line, which seem to be the closest comparison to the Venator, but sporting way more firepower and leaning more into the battleship role more so than an aircraft carrier. Now, where it gets interesting is the Separatist use of smaller frigates and destroyers to round out their fleets, with the Munificent and Recusant classes making up the bulk of any given droid fleet. The presence of these ships alone tips the balance in their favor, as it allows the droids to use the best ship possible for any given threat. Let's say a bunch of fighters were rushing a command ship. Well, then the frigates can use their superior point defense to pick them off. Or maybe the Seps need mobile firepower to quickly hit the Republic. Well, then the destroyers and cruisers can get that job done. They don't have to rely on just one type of ship. And the strengths of the droids doesn't just end with their ships, but also in their starfighter corps as well, with the Seps maintaining a varied fighter group to rival the Republic, while also leaning into the overwhelming numbers strategy that was the doctrine for the entire droid army. You've got the Vulture droid, which made up the main force and specialized in dogfighting and swarm tactics. Lightly armed and armored, they would often outnumber Republic fighters by a significant margin and win through sheer force of numbers. The Tri-Fighter was an excellent interceptor, able to quickly maneuver through any battlefield and get behind their prey for a quick kill. And the Hyena bomber unleashed a devastating barrage of bombs and missiles against anyone unfortunate enough to be in their sights. Now this sounds all fine and good, but sadly the Achilles heel of the Separatist fleet was the poor quality of their ships and their reckless tactics. The droids were never really meant to win the Clone Wars, and their fleet, though varied, wasn't really up to par with where it needed to be. Couple that with the greedy business tycoons designing everything to be as cheap as possible, and you've got yourself a glass cannon. Still better than the Republic though, if you ask me. Off the back of one of the best fleets out there of the four, we now arrive at arguably the worst one in all of Star Wars, the Imperial fleet. Now look, I enjoy the Imperial March as much as the next guy, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't love the look of their ships, but let's be real with each other for just 1 second. The Imperial class Star Destroyer sucks at its job. It just plain sucks. This thing is meant to maintain order in the galaxy and subjugate troublemakers, but the Star Destroyer isn't designed for this. It's made for one thing and one thing only: to kick ass and unleash enough turbo laser fire to glass a planet. It's a battleship and a mobile base. That's fine, but this ship makes up pretty much the entire Imperial fleet. And yes, I know Star Wars Rebels has shown a few other ship types, but in my eyes, that's just Dave Filoni and his writers trying to fix the glaring weakness of the Empire through retcon. The Star Destroyer is ridiculously inflexible and incapable at fighting the rebellion in any meaningful way. It's like the Empire is trying to force some great space battle between itself and the Rebels, where they will clash in a hail of gunfire and win through sheer force of might, but this was just never going to happen. The Rebels aren't stupid, and they've developed ways to attack a Star Destroyer without needlessly wasting one of their own capital ships, and that strategy involves starfighters. And do you know what the Imperial II class Star Destroyer lacks? That's right, point defense. The older Imperial 1 models had some, but not nearly enough, but the supposedly upgraded models stripped out their point defense for more firepower, despite having fought the Rebels and witnessed their tactics firsthand. Okay, so the Star Destroyer isn't that great and can't fight the Rebels properly, but surely they kept the Republic fighter doctrine and maintained a powerful and varied starfighter corps, right? Well, these morons, these absolute embarrassments to naval strategy, they rely on the TIE line of fighters, with the main three being the fighter, the bomber, and the interceptor. The TIE fighter, despite being an icon of Star Wars, is little more than a flying coffin, as it focuses on speed and maneuverability, while also being as cheap as possible for mass production. These things are just death traps, plain and simple. And during the Galactic Civil War, they also served as glorified target practice for the Rebels, with them having no shields, basically no armor. They didn't even have built-in hyperdrives, for God's sakes, meaning that if their home ship got destroyed, those pilots are just dead. And then, one hit, and it's over for the poor souls piloting the TIE fighter anyway. The bomber is also not great. It's very slow, it's very bulky, but it can deliver a solid payload on an enemy target, that is, if they survive long enough to even drop their bombs. And that leaves us with the interceptor. Now, in all fairness, this thing is fast, crazy fast, and can easily outrun and outmaneuver just about any opponent. But it also suffers from the whole no shields thing and basically boils down to a faster TIE fighter, so just a faster coffin. Looking at the Imperial Navy perplexes me. It's almost as if they built their fleet in anticipation of some other great power rising up to meet them in full-scale war, not subjugating the galaxy through fear. Sure, a Star Destroyer or a TIE fighter is scary to look at, but the Empire only had about 25,000 Star Destroyers at their peak, and I don't think I need to tell you just how many more planets and systems there were to control, so they couldn't really even be everywhere at once with these things, leaving tons of areas essentially unguarded and allowing the growing rebellion to run amok while the slow and lumbering Empire struggled to catch up to them. And finally, we arrive at the reason we're all here in the first place: the Rebel fleet. Arguably the most well-rounded fleet in all of Star Wars, despite being the most ragtag faction on this list. Up until this point, we've encountered glaring flaws in other factions, from the Republic's over-reliance on the Venator, the glass cannon that is the Separatists, and just the entire Imperial fleet in general. I'd argue that the Rebel fleet has no real fatal flaw in its composition, but rather it does have one flaw that it turns into a positive throughout the Galactic Civil War, but I'll touch on that more in a bit. For now, let's break down the main ships of the Rebel fleet, starting with the iconic MC-80 Mon Calamari Star Cruiser. These bad boys are the best the Alliance has to offer, and for good reason. With a solid complement of turbo lasers, an unmatched shielding system, and large hangars to deploy fighters from, the Mon Cala cruisers of the Alliance are capable of trading blows with even the Imperial Star Destroyer if need be, while also being able to turn the tide with powerful fighters. Working our way down, we find the Nebulon B frigate, as well as the CR-90 and Hammerhead corvettes, which are the main support ships of the Alliance. They serve the important role of point defense, able to pick off those stupid ties with ease and protect the larger cruisers while also having enough firepower to help attack larger targets if needed. There's also the GR-75 transport, which is found in basically every Rebel fleet, but to this day I have no idea what their use is. They never seem to fire on enemies or block projectiles. I've heard theories that they are resupply ships, or maybe they're just there for target saturation, but at this point I'm convinced they're just there to look pretty. Now, what better way to complement a well-rounded fleet than with an even more well-rounded starfighter corps? I'm confident in saying that the Rebels had the absolute best starfighters in all of Star Wars, and maybe even all of science fiction, but that's an argument for another day. The main workhorse for the Rebels is the legendary X-Wing, a versatile fighter able to dogfight the inferior TIEs with ease, while also being able to carry a complement of torpedoes to take out those pesky Death Stars. It also features a technological advancement that not even the Empire seems to know about. Shields! That's right, the mighty X-Wing, along with every other Rebel fighter, features a built-in shield generator and a hyperdrive. Crazy, right? What will those pesky Rebels think of next? I know, how about bringing back the ever-dependable Y-Wing bomber from the Clone Wars? This bad boy is the same ship you know and love, but with the engine plating removed for ease of repair and to reduce weight for added speed. To counteract those annoying interceptors buzzing around in their ears, we've got the lightning-fast A-Wing, able to easily dogfight any poor ship it comes across. And finally, the experimental B-Wing, which serves as the heavy fighter for the Alliance, equipped with everything from heavy lasers, ion cannons, and even torpedoes. This crazy contraption can take on almost any target, but sadly they're in short supply. Which leads me back to that one flaw of the rebellion I mentioned earlier: numbers. The Rebel Alliance is small, very small, due to the Empire maintaining an iron grip on the galaxy's industry. Throughout the entire war, the Rebels struggled to find warships, and as a result never had more than a few hundred ships at a time, and certainly never maintained large fleets to fight the Empire, as they could never afford to meet them head on. The loss of a Star Destroyer would be nothing to the Empire, they could just build 10 more, but the loss of a Mon Cala cruiser or even a frigate would be devastating to the Rebellion, as they couldn't really replace them that easily. But that's where the flaw becomes a strength. The Rebels designed an effective doctrine around hit-and-run tactics, relying on pinpoint strikes with powerful starfighters rather than bulky battleships. This allowed them to challenge the Empire effectively, and with the constant fear of losing men and material looming over their heads, the leadership of the Rebellion took great care to plan out their next move and allowed for better overall strategy to be created, making them arguably the most flexible faction in all of Star Wars. I've done my best here to line out my argument, but I know I've just scratched the surface of such a complex topic. So now I pass the discussion on to you. Which faction do you think is the best and why? I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments down below. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and as always, cheers.